once again, welcome to our latest webinar in the People Matters series. I'm Richard Knowlton, Director of Security Studies at the Oxford Cyber Academy. Just before we get into the webinar proper, the conventional few words about housekeeping. As you'll see, this webinar is being recorded. We'll be making available both a video and a written summary over the next week or so. And it's worth saying that if you missed any of our previous 5 webinars and would like to see them, please contact Nick Wilding or me, and we'll be pleased to forward the relevant links. You'll see my email address on my background. The second thing to say, we're really keen to get you as involved as is possible on a virtual webinar. So please use the Q&A function to raise questions or issues as we go along, and I'll try to feed them into the discussion. But in any case, I'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for a final discussion. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, what's this People Matter series all about? My friend Nick Wilding and I have been talking for longer than we care to remember about the importance of the human factor in cybersecurity. We've known for years that hackers target people before technology. And for just as long, all of us involved in managing the issues have been repeating the mantra that a vigilant, cyber risk-aware workforce is our main defense against hacking. We're clear that our people are central to our organization's success and reputation. But despite all our efforts, it's a very rare organization that's really cracked the problem. We can see from our daily experience, as well as the statistics, that too many organizations, and I'd even say most, still either discount the human factor in building resilience or apply ineffective, cheap and cheerful tick box approaches to training their employees. In other words, we're letting down our people as well as our organizations. Every day in every organization, people are making simple mistakes that let criminals slip profitably into our data systems. So Nick and I decided last year that we need a fresh look at the problems of human risk management. The aim of the People Matter series is to draw on the experience of leading security practitioners, business leaders, and academics. We want to hear about the latest best practice, detailed evidence of what works, new behavioral perspectives, and data-driven academic research so that we can all learn how to tackle the problems of managing human risk more effectively. A word about my background. I spent most of the last 20 years involved in corporate security. I started as a security director in major multinationals in finance and in telecommunications. I went on to work as a consultant in a wide range of sectors from oil and gas to aviation to automotive production. And now I'm teaching the principles that I've learned at the Oxford Cyber Academy, where I established the Security Studies faculty 4 years ago. Incidentally, a little commercial plug and a newsflash, the Oxford Cyber Academy has just signed a formal MOU with the United Arab Emirates University in Abu Dhabi for cooperation across a range of subjects, which will include cybersecurity, a very exciting new development for us. But let me hand over to Nick Wilding to introduce himself and his company, Cyber Risk Aware.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Delighted that you've taken time out to join us on our webinar this morning. So a little bit of background about me first. I've been in the worked in the cybersecurity sector for too long, since 2000. I had over 10 years at a company called Detica, and then moved on to Axelos Global Best Practice, where I led the development of new cyber resilience best practice training, which included a whole range of NCSC certified awareness training content. My experiences in advising, guiding organisations, whether that's in the boardroom, within the security team, or indeed with HR and L&D, learning and development, to help them adopt a more intelligent and sort of data-led approach to security education. I've also worked very closely with academia to better understand the behavioural science that sits behind that, which is why I'm particularly delighted to have Phil on the webinar this morning, and what the evidence base looks like for what good security education and behaviour change should look like. For me, I think we're still very much at the start of this journey. The goal I see is that we all naturally do security as part of our daily lives. For me, it's a critical life skill that we now all need, whether we're at home, at work, or on the move. And it's clear, I think we all appreciate that over the last 18 months, the modern workplace has changed fundamentally because of what we've been going through. And this has made it, I think, even more important to adapt our security education around the new working patterns and environments we find ourselves in. So looking forward to the discussion with Phil this morning. Hope you enjoy it. As Richard said, please do contribute through the Q&A box as well if you want. So thank you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Nick. And as I said in my introduction, Nick and I were very keen to look at data-driven academic research that could help in tackling the problems that we're facing. We knew that there's quite a bit of interesting work going on around the UK universities at least, though of course it's not always accessible to security professionals. So we couldn't think of a better guest to help us explore the latest developments than our friend Professor Phil Morgan, Director of the Human Factors Excellence Research Group at Cardiff University. Over the next 40 minutes or so, Phil's going to guide us through the issues surrounding the application of behavioural science to security behaviours. Phil's experience is particularly interesting, I think, because he's collaborated in research with several major commercial companies and government. So what he's going to describe is not based just on lab research, but on the real world. So welcome, Phil. Please introduce yourself and your experience, and tell us why you've such a passion for studying behavioural psychology in a security context.
Thanks very much, Richard, and thanks very much, Nick, and good morning all. So I'm Phil Morgan. I'm a professor of human factors and cognitive science within the School of Psychology at Cardiff University in Wales in the UK. My other roles at Cardiff University include, as Richard mentioned, I direct human factors research for the university through what we call the Human Factors Excellence Research Group, or HUFEX for short. I also have another role in that I'm director of a research centre at Cardiff University called the Centre for Artificial Intelligence, Robotics and Human Machine Systems. And one of our core themes within that centre is cybersecurity, as well as lots of other things like artificial intelligence, explainable artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. So I work with a lot of people. I have a lot of research teams. This is a bit of a joke. As a part-time hobby, it's not a part-time hobby. I've been seconded for the last 3 years to Airbus, the major aerospace company, for 80% of my official working time. Where at Airbus, I lead cyber psychology and human factors. I have a team of outstanding people working with me there. And I also lead what's called the Airbus Accelerator in Human-Centric Security. Just a very, very brief history about me. My PhD, I conducted my PhD over 20 years ago on cognitive experimental psychology, so I'm an experimentalist at heart. And I sort of got into human factors very, very soon after my PhD. My first postdoc position, for example, was with the Ministry of Defence, looking at training of military personnel and various other things. Over the years, I've secured about £23 million worth of research funding from all sorts of funding bodies, including UKRI, so ESRC, EPSRC. I've secured funding from Airbus, of course, the National Cyber Security Centre, the Wellcome Trust, Innovate UK, a whole manner of organisations. My key expert areas tend to be cyber psychology. There's no surprise. I guess that's why I'm here today. But also the design, development, and testing of humans in autonomous systems, human-machine interface design, human-computer interaction, and also things like distraction effects when, for example, pilots are landing planes. That was one of my interests quite a few years ago. I've been at Cardiff University for over 15 years, but I've also worked at the universities of South Wales, the University of the West of England, and also within Bristol Robotics Laboratory. So that's a summary of me. And I'm looking forward to having a discussion with Richard and Nick today.
That's great, Phil. Thanks very much for the introduction. And I repeat, we obviously have the right person covering this particular subject for us. Let me kick off with a question that's in my mind, given my previous experience as a security director. So human psychology, cognitive factors, applied social cognition. are not areas traditionally applied to security or being thought about by security professionals. What do you think your discipline, if we call it cyber psychology, has to offer those of us who are actually working in major organizations in the security field?
I think that's a great question and a great opener. So, you know, one of the issues we face, if we call it human-centric cybersecurity or socio-technical cybersecurity, one of the key components there, you know, is us, the humans. Psychology as a discipline, as an academic discipline, has been around for about 150 years, trying to understand, research, and investigate all manner of aspects relating to the human mind, you know, from how our neurons work, how we develop thoughts, feelings, memories, and so on, right the way to the behaviors that we exhibit in the world in which we exist. And we've been doing that in psychology, not for the last 150 years, of course, but across almost every context. We've discovered so much from things like simple interactions between, you know, two people having a conversation, right the way to how humans can handle flying fast jets, how teams can work on space exploration, how we can work undersea discovering all sorts of things. So psychology is a very, very broad discipline encompassing social psychology, cognitive psychology, biological psychology, rigorous research methods and statistics, and also human factors. Human factors for me is a core subdiscipline of psychology, linked to engineering and elements of computer science and other subjects. Our main goal within human factors, one of my main goals, is to use human factors and psychological methods and theories to better understand human interaction with systems, whether that's a computer, a mobile phone device, a plane, whatever it is, with the key sub-goals of trying to improve the symbiosis between people and the technology that they use, ultimately to reduce error and mistakes and to increase usability and the enjoyability of the systems we use. I strongly believe that studying socio-technical cybersecurity is the core if we're ever going to get close to what we call seamless cybersecurity. Without disciplines like psychology and without sub-disciplines like human factors, I don't think we're going to get close. So I think psychology can offer so much to this area, and that's what we've been demonstrating probably over the last couple of decades.
Phil,
Thanks.
Phil, sorry, just a little thing there. Just I'd be interested in getting your view on, is there a sort of a particular or specific challenge as well regarding human cyber psychology, in the fact that, you know, you referenced, you know, space travel, flying fast jets as well. You know, in those instances, there's definitely a common goal, a common aim. Whereas, is there an added challenge because in the cyber world, many people actually don't regard security as one of their important responsibilities?
Yeah, I think there's, yeah, go on. Sorry, Nick, go on.
Yeah, it's just, you know, and what we're trying to do is influence the behaviors of people who typically see information security as technical or not something they can particularly impact themselves. Does this create added issues?
It really does.
Sorry, Phil, can I just add to that? That's something from my experience in telecoms. A telecoms company trying to sell devices, iPhones or whatever they may be, the security director of that context is constantly being told, don't complicate things. We just want something that's easy to plug and play. And that must also be something that you come up against in this context.
Yes, absolutely. So Nick, addressing your first point there, I think cybersecurity, you know, for humans is a huge topic. That's one thing that makes it very different from, for example, you know, investigating how pilots interact with the systems in a cockpit. For example, a very specific example there. Cybersecurity, as you mentioned during, you know, the opening statements, applies to all of us at home, at work, when we're on the move. And not all of us are, you know, anything but experts in cybersecurity. So not only do we have to understand the cybersecurity behaviors, vulnerabilities, and strengths of people who work within cybersecurity, or work within settings with sensitive and confidential data, but we have to try and understand how cybersecurity works for everybody who interacts with systems. So it's an extremely big challenge, which makes for some very, very interesting research that needs to go on over a long period of time. So I think that sort of addresses that point. And then Nick, sorry, Richard, when you mentioned, you know, sort of humans have a tendency to want to plug and play, you know, and just sort of get on with things and not see cybersecurity as a blocker. Many of us will have heard the statistics that humans are the root cause, I do that in inverted commas, of up to 95% of all successful cyber attacks. And by some, this is interpreted as, humans are not very good at cybersecurity. Some people, you'll see in press reports, and this one really upsets me, that humans are stupid. Humans are irrational. We're not very, very good at doing things. I definitely challenge that. In my experience, humans can be one of the strongest lines of defense against cyber attack attempts. And I'll caveat this with three different elements. If we're equipped with the appropriate knowledge, awareness, and understanding of cybersecurity, if we're willing to accept, and not just us, but the organizations we work for, mistakes will be made. We are human, and then not being afraid to talk about those mistakes and report them. And if given an opportunity to change our behaviors and motivation to do so, there needs to be key buy-in from the organizations we work for to do this, as well as individuals. We need to start accepting that cybersecurity is a thing. We are humans. We are going to make mistakes. And let's all try and do something about that. And let's not try and pretend that, that we're not going to make mistakes in a cybersecurity setting, or that we just have to continue to accept that people are never going to be very good at cybersecurity. And I mean, just ending on one key example of that, the plug and play example. We've conducted research, over a number of years to show that yes, people will plug and play devices. They will do this, even though sometimes they know that it's wrong to do so. One of the reasons why people might tend to do this is because quite often they're working with devices in workplace settings that are not their own. They're owned by a company. And one key issue there is the affinity towards the technology that we use. And we're finding that if we can increase the affinity between the technology we use, so it actually feels like part of us, it's more personalized, our systems are more personalized. That's actually one key factor to improving improving stronger cyber behaviors and reducing cyber risk, as opposed to some of the things that people often talk about, like that, well, not as opposed, but an even stronger issue than things like, being impulsive, being a risk taker, having an outgoing extroverted personality, and so on. It's often got more to do with the affinity to the technology we use, the belief in the company that we work for, and the want to protect the systems that we work with.
I think that also goes to the endless argument about BYOD, bring your own device, that I confronted in the companies where I've worked. And certainly people relate better to a device that they know and are familiar with. But of course, the IT security guys hate losing control by allowing people to bring their own stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and Phil, just coming back to your sort of the 3 ifs, as long as staff have got the appropriate awareness, if we're willing to accept that mistakes will be made, and if we have the right motivation and opportunity to improve. My experience is that many organizations still think that, or do provide security awareness. I think probably then think, well, if they know it and if they've been told it, then they will change and adapt their behaviours. I think organisations are getting better at the reporting, although that's still relatively slow, I think. But that's such a great opportunity to build a confidence and collaboration with your employees. But it's that last one as well, motivation. I think that's something that you've just touched on about personalising technologies. Providing that motivation to make the change, I think, is absolutely critical, and that's where we've still got, I think, a lot to learn. So, can you? Is the sort of the personalisation of technology? Is that an example of that working in practice?
I think it is. I think it's organisations, very much demonstrating to their employers that they care about their cybersecurity behaviours, and sort of. A lot of people often say this, but it's often said and nothing's done about it. Sort of encouraging no blame cultures, where if something does go wrong, or even if something hasn't gone wrong, if it's almost gone wrong, to be able to speak up about it, to say this almost happened or this did happen, and to think about almost using like a black box thinking approach, to think about all of the factors that were going on at that point in time and just before that might have led to that risky behaviour. Personalization is definitely one way of getting a buy-in from employees to show that companies care, about their employees and care about what they might need to make things better. And I often give the example, within cybersecurity, it's still very much the case that lots of people are scared of cybersecurity, in the sense that if I do something wrong, I'm going to be pointed at, I'm going to be blamed, and I'm going to be shamed. So therefore, I'm not going to say anything. And sort of companies thinking, what can we do about it? But taking the example of when we get a new job, or we get a new office, or we're working from home, or whatever it is, we're very much accepting of the fact, and so are companies, that we're given a chair, we might be given a desk, we might be given all sorts of devices, to support our back, to make sure we don't get repetitive strain injury, and all of those things, that they're fine. They're kind of part of our expectations these days. And why can't cybersecurity be the same? Why can't it be the case that when we go into an organization and work for an organization, that we're all kind of fitted, for want of a better term, but fitted, I think, actually works quite well for our cybersecurity vulnerabilities and strengths. Rather than seeing it as something that's a slur on us, let's see it as something that is, being human after all, and let's provide the support mechanisms to employees so that we can better do something about it. Very much like the chair example.
As you say, the right responsibilities and the right processes to make that happen as well, so that people are aware of their responsibilities from day one.
Yeah, and not being afraid, just not being afraid. It's part of everyday life. It's part of the workplace environment, and we need to embrace it. We need to share our experiences of it. We need to share our stories of it with our employers, with our colleagues, and we can learn from our mistakes or near mistakes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just make a comment on that, Phil, because I agree absolutely with what you've been saying about blame and the blame culture. And it's been rather distressing, actually, to hear over the last 2 years with COVID, how many companies are actually introducing effectively surveillance measures against their staff to make sure they are working, they are sitting at the keyboard and so on, which for me sets a sort of dreadful image of how the company relates to the worker.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, you start sort of implementing those measures, and yeah, it is very much taking an approach of, we don't really trust you to do what you're meant to be doing, and then how can you increase motivation and behaviour change, from implementing things like that.
The other aspect of this, certainly from a security director perspective, distressingly for us, humans are not very logical, or don't seem to be to us, and they can be very fickle. So how is it possible to change behavior in a positive direction when you've got a population of actually usually very diverse individuals?
Yes, I think that's where the psychology side comes in, and for me, the human factor side as well. I'll sort of make 3 points, I think, regarding this. The first one, and it's something that I live by, is that a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work. The idea that within an organization where you may have 5 employees or 105,000 employees, a one-size-fits-all approach through sort of a training awareness session would come up with an intervention, and this is going to work for everybody. It's not. We are human after all. Some people share similar characteristics. Lots of us share similar characteristics, but we are all very different across multiple dimensions. It could be personality, it could be decision-making style, it could be risk-taking, it could be our awareness of technology, our affinity to the technology we use, as I mentioned earlier on. And even though we can all sort of, be sort of grouped, if you like, according to various characteristics, every single person is going to be different when we start modeling these things. So if we're going to come up with interventions like the work we've been doing over a number of years, they need to be tailored towards individuals or personas of individuals. The second point I'd like to make is that training alone is not going to solve the problem. I'm afraid to say that, but I know a lot of people out there work on training solutions, and some of them are very, very good. Some of them are, are fantastic. But training alone is not going to work. It doesn't always work, and it most certainly doesn't work for all people. And sometimes one of the downsides of training is the effects are short-lived. They work in the training session. You can show a positive change towards more better cybersecurity behaviours at the end of the session, and then a week later that disappears. So we need to better understand that. And then finally, what I'd like to say on this question is more needs to be invested in objective measurement of human cyber behaviours, and not just subjective measurement, scales, questionnaires, those kind of things. I work with these kind of things, I develop these kind of things, and I use them all the time. But we need to do more on objective measurement of cybersecurity behaviours. Just some examples of that are, studies, using studies that involve the collection of behavioural data, so how we interact with our systems, eye movement data, what's happening in terms of our visual processing, depth of processing, and so on. Actually measuring behavior, action at the neuronal level, using, for example, EEG kit, and various other things, so that we can really start to synergize objective and subjective measures and triangulate the data that we're collecting to develop better solutions.
Can I?
Sorry, Rich, I was just going to add there. Just to add to that, and I'm sure you're a supporter of this, in all the work that I've done as well, is the sort of the vital importance of truly understanding, talking to and listening to the very people we're trying to educate as well, our employees. Because my experience is that if you ask them and you ask them in the appropriate way and you involve them and collaborate with them in the right way, they'd be very happy to tell you what their day-to-day challenges are in complying with company security policies. And I think we need to, we need to do that more, and we need to listen to and adapt what we're doing to ensure our security controls are fit for purpose. And again, comes back to this helping to motivate them, not hinder safer behaviours.
Yeah, I think speaking to that point, I totally agree 100%. And one thing that I've always done throughout my research career, and it's one of the first lessons I teach my PhD students, I've got lots of PhD students and I have in the past, is don't assume that we know what people want in the context that we're investigating. And I developed this kind of, this way of thinking very much from my early days work with the MOD. And I remember challenging a person I was working with at the time who was very, very senior, who said, we're going to do some work with the MOD on training, awareness, and so on. We know what the MOD do because we've read papers and we've read books. And I, as a very kind of young, just, sort of postdoc researcher, said, I've got family members who are in the military, throughout generations, but I don't know what different, military regiments do and what the Air Force do. And we need to ask them what they do. We need to go and talk to them. We need to find out what they do on a day-to-day basis. And surprise, surprise, well, no surprise, I find that when you go and do this, yes, we know elements about what people do based upon the descriptions of jobs and so on. But often things are done in very, very different ways to what we appreciate. So we need to speak to people first, get an understanding of what the situation is, and then start conducting the other types of research after that.
Well, we've received some questions. Questions are rolling in now, which is great. Ali Norwood, thanks for your question, which is about attitudes to risk. What I'm going to do, however, is to hold a couple of these questions till later on in the discussion, because there were issues that Nick and I wanted to raise in any case. So don't worry if we don't immediately go to your question. They're very much in our minds. Phil, let me turn to something that I find very interesting, which is around the design of interfaces that can better support human performance and decision making. And I know this is something you've done a lot of work on. Can you talk about what this means in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I refer to this as HMI, human machine interface design. It's one of my core research areas and has been since I started my PhD over 20 years ago. All too often, it is getting slightly better, but all too often we find that a number of human machine interfaces are designed without careful consideration of the end users in mind. And what I mean by that is not that, companies are designing interfaces, that are deliberately bad. It's that companies sometimes are designing interfaces with a small number, of experts, so people who are very, very kind of educated in human machine interface design. They're IT savvy. They know their way around computers, those kind of things. And then they may test on a small subsample, of the population, 20, 30, 40, 50, or even 150 people, to get, some indication of how these people interact with the technology. And then something is deployed on a large scale, assuming that millions of people are going to be able to use it. There are some key factors there. There are 4 key factors that I live by when it comes to human machine interface design principles. And this goes back to your point, Nick, about understanding the users as well. We need to work with the users in a co-design process, not assume again that we know what they want. And we need to think about accessibility. So how human machine interfaces are accessed. And that's not just, the layout of a keyboard, all sorts of things, where things are positioned on a screen. Some people might not have, the ability to actually touch something. They might have to do it through, through other means. So accessibility. usability, so that the interface is usable for all of the reasons it's meant to be used for. Functionality, that it has the right functionality for people, not too little, not too much. And one of, I think, the really key and important factors for me, which we're able to do a lot more about these days with technological advancements, is adaptability. So the ability to adapt interfaces for individuals and not just have a one-size-fits-all interface for everybody. When we hear them, for example, going back to the military examples, lots of people talking about, we've got one interface, how can this possibly work for everyone? And these factors can then feed in, to sort of tailor in interfaces so that people are more inclined to use them in an effective manner, use their cognition to interact with the interfaces a bit more, and then be less likely to fall prey to things like automatic processing strategies, where we're kind of interacting with an interface, in a way that we're not thinking as much as we used to years ago, and that is leaving us very exposed to making errors and mistakes. And that can be where some of the percentage of the statistics are coming from, with people being a cause of successful cyber attacks. Time and time again, I speak to people and I see lots and lots of research where people say, there is no way on earth I would have made that mistake under normal circumstances, but for some reason, at that point in time, when I was interacting with the interface, I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing, and I clicked the link. And I feel really bad because I wouldn't normally have clicked the link. And it's often because of bad human-machine interface design that will happen. So we've written over the years for various projects and various organizations, a number of guides to human-machine interface design for cybersecurity, for autonomous vehicles, for command and control centers, and various other things. It's a massive passion of mine to try and get this right.
That makes me think a little bit about things I've heard around soft and hard constraints. Can you explain what these terms mean and what is their potential role in supporting secure behaviors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they can mean different things in different contexts, but I'll start with hard constraints and what hard constraints mean to me. And I'll give you an example I think that everybody can relate to when it comes to hard constraints. So not too long ago, ATMs, cash machines, when you went to get cash out of a machine, you would first receive your cash, and then you'd have to remember to take your card. And there's probably a number of people in the audience today who will remember stories of not remembering to take the card. They've got their cash, they've achieved their main goal, and then maybe an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours later, you realize the card is hopefully in the machine, and now I've got to go and retrieve it from the bank. But imagine a scenario now where the card is still in the machine and somebody can grab it and go and buy lots of things using contactless payment. That's a really big risk. So hard constraint that changed within ATM device design through this kind of thing that we call post-completion error is to give you your card back first before you get your ultimate goal of receiving your money. So that's a hard constraint, and there's not too much you can do about it, because if you want to get your money, you have to take your card out first. These hard constraints can be applied to interfaces. And I'm a very firm believer that we need hard constraints in some situations. The ATM example, the cash machine example I just gave, I think there's not many people out there who would argue that it wasn't a good idea to make that change. It's a very good idea to do that. But within interfaces, within cybersecurity settings where cybersecurity is an issue, for example, I don't think it's such a bad idea that in some situations that people are, for want of a better word, forced to pay maybe a 1 or 2 or maybe 3 second cost to access really important sensitive information in that interface, so that we don't automatically process the information. We actually think about it a bit more first. That can help us using soft constraints, the strategies that we have to perform tasks in various ways, to think more about the information, to attend to it more, to try and remember it more, and to think about what it means. And then quite often we'll spot, for example, a method of persuasion in a phishing email. We've done research on this over the last 15 years, and I've published multiple papers. If people go to my website, if you type Phil Morgan, Cardiff University into Google, you'll find multiple papers on hard and soft constraints. One thing I'd like to finish on there as well when it comes to soft constraints, so soft constraints applied to devices. So I've been lucky to work with colleagues in the past who don't always agree with my idea that hard constraints are a good thing. And I've come up with sort of soft constraint devices. And one example is a colleague of mine, Dr. Emily Collins, who designed a system through some cybersecurity funding that she received, that when you're working, you know, on a laptop device or a computer in an office or at home, you have an ambient light display, you know, next to your device, such that when you move out of a certain field of view, the light will change from green to amber, like a traffic light system, to warn you that you're moving away from your device. So therefore, you should probably think about securing it. You know, shut the lid on the laptop, or you know, Control Alt Delete and secure the device. And the further away you move from that device, it becomes red, and then it flashes red to let you know. And in an open plan office environment, not only can that encourage people to you know, to engage in better device securement, but you've got other people around you who can see your device flashing red. That doesn't actually stop you from doing it, though. You know, you can turn it off, you can unplug it, you can do all sorts of things. You can use soft constraints to use workarounds. So again, I'll go back to my initial point that I think in some situations we absolutely need hard constraints, but we also need to make the most of people's cognitive strategies and how we can adapt to things using soft constraints.
And presumably, Phil, those sorts of techniques and soft and hard constraints, again, their success is dependent on the persona that you're trying to change the behaviours of, the sort of the different personas, because we will all respond and react to those sorts of initiatives in different ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, some people, you know, will show, you know, sort of a great deal of resistance, you know, to these kind of things, to say that, you know, I don't want to pay a 1 or 2 or 3 second lockout display every time I view my email inbox. So why would I want to do that? I'm a busy person. I've got lots of things to do. I think it's really, you know, the key there is demonstrating the benefits to people of these approaches, to show them at baseline what behaviors and what performance is like without these kind of interventions, and then to show them after the interventions what the benefits are. You know, and it in some respects, you know, it's sort of saying to people, you know, just take a second or two, just to sit back and think before we act. And the number of times I say this to my children, you know, just take a second or two before you do that thing, because you might regret it.
And how many times do we read in blogs? And I've written blogs myself, or articles where I say, you know, stop, think before you click, you know.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think there's so much mileage in that, but it's through demonstrating to people what the benefits could be, through, you know, to individuals, to employees, and to organizations. You know, the benefits of paying these small costs can be absolutely colossal.
Sure.
I was just thinking the lesson I had drummed into me when I was new in government was that however angry you were, never send that email late in the afternoon, think about it overnight. It's much better when it's done on reflection.
Absolutely.
But one of the problems in all of this, Phil, is that each of us is different. Each of us is an individual, and different people behave in different ways. I mean, that's even without beginning to think about cultural issues and so on. I know this is something you're working on, but can you update us on what you're doing and how it might be applied to those of us who are running cyber awareness programs?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that, you know, sort of makes me very, very happy with the job that I do, you know, working within psychology. I got into psychology because people are different, and I wanted to understand, you know, what the differences are between people, and how we can make improvements in all sorts of contexts, you know, real life settings outside of the laboratory and so on, for people. So, you know, some people have argued when it comes to cybersecurity in the past. I sometimes get the sense, you know, that for want of a better term, you know, sometimes we'll go for the obvious factors, like, okay, so people are cyber risky. It must be the case that those people who are higher risk takers are going to be more risky when it comes to cybersecurity. Those people who are more impulsive are going to be the people who are more risky when it comes to cybersecurity. Those people who've got a more extroverted personality are going to be more risky because they're more likely to send that email, that knee-jerk email, you know, and do those kind of things. We've been investigating all sorts of factors when it comes to, you know, human individual differences, social psychology, cognitive psychology, surrounding those kind of things. But also not just looking at your typical individual differences, even things like age, even things like experience within your job role and background and all these kind of things, but also environmental factors, the context in which you're working in, the factors that are within that context. So for example, what about the effects of things like cognitive pressure? What about time pressure? Are you working in an environment where you've got lots of distractions going on in the background, where you've got interruptions happening, where you have to task switch, where you have to multitask? Because all of those things can make us very, very cyber risky, on top of our individual differences characteristics, as well as I mentioned before, you know, our relationship with the technology that we use, our affinity to the technology we use and how we interact with it. So it's not just a case of trying to understand human individual differences, it's trying to understand humans and their individual differences within the context that they work and within the wider context that they work, and then trying to build effective interventions based on that. And that's one of the things we've been focusing on for at least the last 5 or 6 years. 3 years within Airbus, a very, very dedicated program of research within Airbus on this, where we've been developing what we call, and of course we call them these gold standard tools that through our latest iteration of some of these tools that measure cybersecurity behaviors, strengths and vulnerabilities, are able to account for up to 70% of the reasons why people engage in cyber risk behaviors. And that's not just to do with the individual differences, you know, what's going on in our mind. It's also, in some cases, more importantly, to do with the environments in which we work in and our relationship with the technology that we use. So up to 70% of behaviors can be explained by some of the tools that we've developed. So we're obviously very, very proud of that. We feel that these are some of the best tools that exist.
Phil, that's really exciting stuff. What can this mean for security education? I assume that many of the people on the webinar today are sort of actively involved in security awareness and education in their companies. Are we close, do you think, to a point where we can be far more, well, clearly we can be far more targeted, but predictive as well in our training interventions, basing those on these sorts of personas that we can create and the behavior traits within those personas, you know, training in real time effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so, going back to the example of the tools, you know, some people might, you know, sort of be asking or thinking about the question of how can these tools, you know, be used, you know, for us, and, you know, how do we actually make any change based on the tools? So going to the example of personas that you gave there, Nick. So imagine a scenario where you through a training or an awareness session, it could be an onboarding session in a company, you undergo one of our cybersecurity vulnerabilities and threats. The results for us tend to be lots of data. The results for the people using it will be lots of data to speak to what the key factors are that are leading to the vulnerable behaviors. But for the person who is experiencing that tool, the key outcome could be a persona that is presented to them to say, okay, you know, it could be persona 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You seem to identify most with persona 3, but you've also got elements of persona 1 and some elements of persona 6. These are your key vulnerabilities. These are your key strengths. So then when you move on within your journey, you know, within the company, it could be after onboarding and then you go to a cyber security awareness session, your organization, if they're willing to do it, can work with you, you know, to sort of encourage you to say, okay, we don't need to know who you are as an individual, but what persona did you identify with the most? Because we can then tailor interventions around the personas, rather than sort of, you know, sort of this idea of finger pointing at individuals.
You've not had any pushback from people you've been researching, the staff, about asking all of these questions?
That's a very, very good question. So I'd be lying if I was to say we didn't to begin with. So to begin with, you know, a lot of people were quite skeptical, saying, okay, you're collecting lots of data on me, because we do collect lots of data. You're collecting lots of data on me. How can I be sure that this data is not going to be used against me in the future? You know, something happens, I accidentally click on a link, or I open a zip folder, I have to go and talk to my managers, and they're going to pull out my data and say, well, we knew this was going to happen all along because you were scoring high on these different factors. What people have realized through our ethically sound research, I'm a firm believer in ethical research. I've applied ethics to all the research I've done over the years. I've chaired, you know, university ethics committees, faculty ethics committees, and so on. Our work is very ethical in the sense that the data we collect can never be traced back to individuals. You know, you generate a code. If you want to take part in a study in the future, and we want to kind of match your data based on, you know, your baseline data in the past and an intervention, we develop in the future. You provide the code so that we can combine the data. We still don't know it, you provide your persona. Over a series of time within the organizations I've worked in, within Airbus, the organization I work within now, this has really, really demonstrated to employees that we're not targeting them, we're supporting them, we're trying to help them. And there's been so much buy-in to this as a, this is not a data collection. It is partly a data collection exercise, but it's not solely a data collection exercise. This is because the organization is invested in the staff, with a big want to support effective behavior change when it comes to human-centric cybersecurity. Once you've got that buy-in, you become part of that kind of co-design process as well.
Do you find that you can use the personas to track people's changing behaviors, so people might move from one persona to another?
Absolutely. One of the examples I give, I was trying to explain this again to my children a little while ago, because they often, they ask me, well, not often, sometimes they say, Dad, what do you do? And then I speak for 2 minutes, and then they often walk away because they get bored.
I just say I'm a spy.
Yeah. I think I have done that in the past. Got me into trouble with the school teacher once, but I use the example, and I said to them, they said, well, what are these persona things? I don't get how these things work. And I said, well, imagine when you walk into a dentist. And you walk into a dentist and you've got these cartoon characters on the wall about all different kind of dental hygiene characters, and you look at these and you think, yeah, that one really sort of relates to me. I am the person who brushes my teeth twice a day for a minute. I don't floss always. I don't do this always. And I don't stick to my 6-month appointments. I come every 2 years. If I want to be the ultimate dental hygiene warrior, I want to be more like, whatever we want to call it, let's call it the ultimate cybersecurity warrior. I need to get my persona from there to there. And in order to do that, I need to make some changes. And we can tell people through the data we collect, or we can advise them on what those changes need to be. And then if there's company buy-in to that, the company can develop interventions that can support employees to get to that ultimate cyber warrior status. I need to come up with a better term for it. Ultimate cyber warrior sounds cool, but the persona names.
It sounds, it's part of the future, isn't it? Is actually helping. It's a bit like, I don't know, a fitness regime or something like that. It's probably a bad example.
Yeah.
You're given a journey to go on from unfit to fitter. And we can help people do that.
We can help them do it, and we can even use things, like gamification to make it interesting, to make it fun. You want to get from this stage to this stage to this stage, and you feel good about doing it. You actually feel good about being more cyber secure and making these changes. And again, that goes back to the point I made earlier on about motivation.
Because the other thing is, the workplace now, lots of us are now working from home permanently, and it's about being safe at home as well, with our own information, our family's information, and helping our people do that as well.
Yes.
Phil and Nick, we're into the last 10 minutes, so I would like to raise a couple of questions that have come in on the Q&A line. There's also a big question I'd like to ask towards the end. So a couple really about company buy-in. First of all, from Ali, what's your take on how individuals view cyber risks, i.e. staff, and how the organization or board views cyber risk? I've noticed a difference between the board and staff on this issue, with the underlying message that this is a you thing, not a we thing. Is our messaging and engagement part of the issue? And then an anonymous questioner has asked about our opinions on increasing leadership buy-in to security. When leaders don't internalize security, it isn't role modeled or communicated down to lower tiers with any emphasis. And how important do you think leaders are to security uptake? Well, I think we've all got strong views on that one. But Phil, you go first.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they're very, very good questions. It's incredibly important. If there's no leadership buy-in, or if the leadership buy-in, is weak or minimal, then how can we, ever encourage change? I've been lucky enough, probably over the last decade, to be working with organisations who are very, very serious about change. And I'll give the example of Airbus. The reason that I've been working with Airbus for the last 3 years. Initially there was a discussion between myself and the Chief Information Security Officer at Airbus about wanting to do something about this problem of human-centric cybersecurity, wanted to support employees and wanted to do things. And the reason our work has been funded, and it's a lot of funding. There's a lot of people involved. It's not just me within my team. You know, there's me, there's research associates, there's PhD students, there's equipment, there's all sorts of things. Is because within Airbus, from the leadership levels, particularly within cybersecurity, they really, really, really want to support employees to change. So leadership buy-in is incredibly important. I guess you're not going to get it in all organizations, but I think organizations are moving more towards buy-in and moving away, maybe taking small steps to moving away from, you know, it's not just all about a tick box exercise and providing graphs to show that over 6 months, you know, because we've delivered this training and awareness, something has changed by 10%, so therefore we've done it. A number of organizations are moving towards a more data-driven approach, and that really, really excites me, and I encourage all organizations to do that.
Yeah, I fully concur with that, Phil. I think with leaders, business leaders, a lot of it is down to measurement. Show me the evidence that we're doing is being effective and having a positive impact on the organization. So don't give them reports about the percentage of people, your staff who've taken security awareness training. Tell them about actual behavior change based on actual behaviors within your organization. And that's the work that, you know, my little dig, that's the work that we do at Cyber Risk Aware. It's critical that they're able to see the real impact and benefit, financial and you know, reputational impact that it has on their organization, and that they can see that behaviors are improving over time. That's critical.
I absolutely agree with all of the above, and the only positive thing I can say in a sense is that after the 15, 20 years of my experience, attitudes at the senior levels in companies have changed. I think the simple fact was that at the beginning and until relatively recently, security people were their own worst enemies. They saw certain truths as self-evident and didn't really make much effort to understand things from the business point of view, which of course is where you need to start.
Yeah, I think also just to add very quickly to that, is that people are moving away from this belief that technological solutions are the only thing that we need. Socio-technological approaches are crucial.
Can I slip in? No, sorry, go on, Nick.
So I was just going to finish that off, just saying, and you know, again, my experience is that many boards are becoming more perceptive of the need for their responsibility to take ownership and accountability for this, off the back of many highly well publicised incidents that have actually involved business leaders themselves. We know about whaling attacks and some of the things that these are very significant attacks that can really truly harm some of the organisations out there.
I just wanted to slip in a detailed question here from Monica. Could you expand on objective measurements and what data sources could be useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a very data-driven person by nature. I always have been. As I said, I was trained in cognitive experimental psychology during my PhD. So objective measures that we tend to take, you know, are behavioural inputs with the devices that we use. You know, so logging key presses, interstimulus intervals, all sorts of things to do with the interfaces we interact with. We also use measures such as, you know, eye movement, eye gaze data, and it's not just about, you know, what you're fixating on or whether you're erratically moving around the screen, but with some of the technology we've got now, we can even look at things like how your pupils are dilating, which gives you an insight into the degree to which you're processing the information in memory or not. So we use those kind of measures. We use mobile EEG kit, so to measure neuronal activity, you know, within the brain. That can give you an indication to what extent people are attending to information, perceiving information, remembering information, thinking about information, and even things like, it's not a great term, but human state monitoring. So, you know, there's some of the devices that we've got, like watches like this, where we can measure heart rate fluctuations and all sorts of other things, facial expressions and so on. Together, this objective data, together with subjective data, can really paint a very, very strong and broad picture of what's going on in a particular situation when somebody's interacting with the device. And from that, I strongly believe we can build the most effective interventions by having that rich data.
Can I just inject one final question, Phil, which is kind of a question that embraces almost everything you've been saying in a sense. This is from Hannah. I'm interested in your views on the gap between knowledge and behavior. For example, we all know we should eat healthily and exercise regularly, but we don't do it. And it's the same with security. We know we shouldn't use the same passwords for multiple accounts, but we often do because it's easier. How do you bridge the gap between knowledge and real behavior change?
That's an incredibly good question, and it's very, very difficult because, as you know, with the examples that you gave there, there's no easy way to say that, well, it just happens in cybersecurity, whereas it doesn't when it comes to exercise and cessation and all, those kind of things. But I think, within the cybersecurity world, knowledge alone is not enough. We need to experience the behavior change firsthand. And we can experience the behavior change firsthand by looking at the outcomes of the interventions that are implemented. We've shown this time and time again with employees how that can help. But we can also do it virtually as well through, so one thing I haven't talked about during the session today, and there's not enough time to talk about it in detail, but I'll happily answer questions, if people wish to email me or whatever else, is immersing people in scenarios using virtual and augmented reality. So they can actually see through good behaviors what the outcomes can be. So, if you can actually see what the outcomes can be and what the outcomes can be, if they're positive, that's great. But what the negative outcomes could be if you perform something in a certain way. So you've got the knowledge, but you behave in a certain way, and then this incident occurs. That tends to stick with us quite well. So I'm quite a firm believer, in using sort of, if you like, a virtual reality hazard perception test within cybersecurity, so we actually experience the outcomes of the things that we're doing. So that's one answer I'd give to that question in the time that we have.
And it comes back to so many discussions we've had in previous webinars, doesn't it, Richard, where it's all about the relevance and the relatability of these sorts of scenarios. Why me? What does this, how does this impact me? And if people can see, and it comes back to your dentist's analogy just now, Phil, that this is me, this is, or this is someone I know, and that begins to stick. And too much security awareness training is too much of a sort of a, for want of a better phrase, a sheep dip, giving out generic information to everybody when a lot of it actually probably isn't that relevant to them.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the, the sort of organizational buy-in take there as well, what executives of organizations need to realize that this is not a quick win situation. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a bit of a slow burner. We need, that statistic, the 95% of cyber attacks caused by humans, it's not going to go from 95 to 20% or 10% through the research that we're doing. But if we can keep getting it down through these, through better understanding human behavior, better developing better interventions and so on, if that can keep coming down over time, then I think we're winning.
Bill, Nick, we're up against the final whistle, I'm afraid. So let me give myself a couple of minutes extra time as we started 2 minutes late. Just a quick take from me, and then Nick, you might want to add. I mean, a lot of takeaways in that. It was very, very rich, Phil, so we're really grateful. But the number of things that really struck me about what you said, the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. Generalization is a huge mistake, I think, is a point that you've made. Interventions need to be tailored. They need to be adaptable. I think probably, and this is the subject for our next webinar, Phil, because obviously we're going to ask you to come back, how this can actually work in the workplace, how you have a multi-approach when you're in a specific workplace. You said that training alone doesn't solve the problem, and obviously there's need for more research, and it sounds as if you've got plenty underway. Nick, any particular takeaways that you wanted to highlight?
I think the strongest one for me is this assumption that we know what human cyber behaviors and vulnerabilities and strengths actually are, without either talking to our employees about what they say they are, and then frequently measuring them, and also understanding that the cyber world is constant and the cyber threat world constantly moving, and that we need to adapt, evolve, change, and listen. And it's those four words are probably the wrong way around. So I think that's crucially important. It's just to echo what Phil said, and this is one of the tough messages for the boards, is this does take time. It is a cultural, it's a behavioural challenge, and will take time, but the benefits of it are enormous. And there are now measurement tools, and this is what the work that we're doing at Cyber Risk Aware, ways in which you can actively measure and track actual behavior change within your organization. So yes, it's for me, it's about measurement time and time again.
much, Nick. And Phil, thanks again so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's been absolutely fascinating, as I said before. And please do come back. We're going to need another session. That's quite clear.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and already looking forward to coming back.
You'll be very welcome.
Can I just ask everyone on the call? Sorry, Richard, you may be about to do this. We would love to get Richard and I would love to get your feedback, ideas for future discussion themes, the ways in which we could improve these webinars. They're deliberately designed to be chats without slides, so more of those fireside chats, and potential, future speakers. Any of you would like to speak and contribute to some of these webinars? We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely, Nick. You've stolen my lines. But anyway, I wanted to say to everybody who's been here, thanks very much for spending the hour with us, and we hope you enjoyed our conversation. Feedback would be fantastic. Please let us have that.
And one final thing as well, I did see in the chat, there's a lot of discussion around road safety and using the road safety analogy. I've got a personal interest there. I used to investigate road accidents many, many years ago, and I fully concur with those, but I may well contact the guys involved in that separately just to keep that discussion going.
Perfect. Okay, well, just to give a little hint about our next session, we haven't finalized it yet, but it's going to take place in early mid-March, and certainly you'll all get the information about it in due course. What we're thinking of doing in the next session is to look at how to develop security behaviors as a life skill, something that's been touched on a couple of times in Phil's presentation today. A little tease about our speaker, because I'm not going to reveal their identity yet. They could be described as a social engineer, hacker, and email prankster. So they'll be using their experience and stories from their experience during the discussion to highlight the critical ways we can all better protect ourselves. So once again, thanks particularly to Phil for his contribution today. Fantastic. Nick, thank you very much, and thank everybody for attending. Look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.
Many thanks, Phil. Thanks, Richard, and thanks everyone for attending. Take care. Have a good day.